I'm Ryan Ballard, and this is my story on obedience. Something that I'd like to make sure is right up front is that this story is not about me. It's not about the people that you'll hear on here or see on here, but it's about Christ and Christ alone and His calling on my life and everyone out there's life. I've been in the Lord's house most of my life. You know, I always wanted to do right, and it seemed like everything I did went right for a time, but then it was wrong. I could never get over that roller coaster ride and trying to do the right thing, but I couldn't until one night when I was 21 years old. I asked Jesus to save me, and truly was at the end of my rope. I believe He did, and you know, I felt that peace that passes all understanding, and it was like nothing I'd ever felt before. And one of the things that happened though for me, right after that, I began to live just like the rest of the world, even though I had just been saved from this this life of torment, basically. For 9 years there, it rocked on until I finally one night made Jesus Lord of my life. So there was a difference. I asked Him to save me, basically selfishly, because I didn't want to go to hell. But there came a time when I knew I was playing games, and I began to just fade away. There's also been this learning process, and part of that process has been to obey Him when He begins to speak, because there was a long time that I didn't even know that the Lord would speak. And so for me, He speaks through peace, because sometimes you ask, well, did you hear the audible voice of God? But it was more of He began to speak to me through things that I would begin to think of and begin to try to process, and then peace would fall on that. He began to send godly people in my life. In a real way, Christ in these brothers of mine began to show me how to live Christ out in, say, the workplace, going to the grocery store, wherever you might be found during the day. I have a real good friend of mine that we began to fish together and began to spend time with each other and going out and just having a really good time, not just in the ministry, but also in the fact that, you know, we shared this common joy. And you know, I was beginning to get back to the joy that I had in fishing, because for so many years there was a time when I identified as this guy that had this really nice boat and had these really nice things, and I began to identify myself in that, and so as time went on, I realized that, you know, I didn't need to put my identity in those things. And so out of that came the joy of just spending time with my brother in Christ and my friends, and so basically spending time on the water with someone that I just enjoy sharing conversations about the Lord, and just beginning to move deeper in my relationship with the Lord and with brothers and sisters of mine. So one of the things that happened was that over the course of time, I knew that my friend Mason was looking for a boat, and never once crossed my mind, hey, you know, I ought to just give him my boat. But one evening, I remember it just as clear as day. The Lord spoke to my spirit and said, give your boat to Mason. Now, one thing you need to know about the boat I had at the time, this was my uncle Delbert's boat, and he had passed away several years before. My aunt had asked me if I wanted it, and I had just sold a Skeeter, a ZX 225, fully loaded 2008 model Skeeter. It was my dream boat, and that was the identity part that I found myself in, that identified in that guy. So anyway, I had sold that and went for almost a year without having a boat. And my dad, even through his heart attack and things, he had allowed me to borrow his boat for that summer. So God provided even during that time that I was struggling trying to follow him in that obedience of, like, I don't want to find my identity in a boat, I want to find it in him. My aunt reached out to me. I didn't ever think that she would consider getting rid of that boat, and so she asked me if I wanted it, and so I went and got my Uncle Delbert's boat, and man, it was just awesome. It was an 81 model Renegade Screaming Eagle 2, really cool old boat. I always thought it'd be cool if I had it, and I never dreamed that I would have the opportunity to have that, and a lot of fun to fish out of, and so I went and picked it up and brought it home, fixed it all up. You know, I put new carpet in it, put new seats and things, and so I had this boat for about 2 years and loved the boat. And so, like I said, I heard the Lord tell me in my spirit to give that boat to Mason, and nearly a year went by. And so one night I was, you know, we were at a revival, and the guy was talking about, you know, he could hear the things that God was saying over our lives, but he was there that night to for us to hear what God said. And it was just almost as clear as day. The Lord said, you heard me a year ago, and if you want to hear me again, you'll be obedient. And the guys couldn't get it home fast enough. We you know, went back in that night, and I told Marla, I said, look, we're giving this boat to Mason. I've got to be obedient here. And so it was really cool because she just felt that too, and she was just, yeah, absolutely, if that's what the Lord's telling you to do. So guys, I want y'all to know something. The really neat thing about this was, because like I say, I was stepping out in faith, and it was something that I'd never done on that level before, to trust him. I just said yes, okay. Something that was near and dear. It wasn't like this was like a boat that was just any boat. It was, you know, something that was my uncle's and something I held near and dear. And so I was just, like I say, I was trying to hear the Lord.
Ryan Ballard called me one evening, and I believe it was either on a Friday or a Saturday, and told me that God told him that he was supposed to give me his boat. And at that point, I believe my response was, no, God didn't. I don't believe he did. I'm sorry. And we talked about it for a while, and at the end of the conversation, it was still no, God didn't tell you that. I've known the Ballards for a long time. They are outdoorsy people. I see pictures of Ryan and his kids fishing in that boat, playing in that boat, and just having a good time in that boat. And the last thing that I really wanted to do was take away something that enjoyment comes from for his family.
I tried all these really tricky ways, whatever, I was gonna surprise him on a fishing trip and say, hey, there's your boat. I mean, all these goofy things that I would have done, this is, me doing it or whatever, didn't work out. So I called him up and told him that, and he said, you're not giving me that boat. I'm not gonna take it.
I had no position in doing that. That just wasn't where I was at, wasn't gonna be where I was at. So Ryan said, well, why don't you, I think he said, why don't you just pray about it? So that night, I prayed about it. The next morning, I woke up and I talked to my wife about it. And I said, you won't believe what Ryan Ballard's trying to do. And talked to her about it, and she just got to giggling. I think about another week passed, and Ryan would either text me or call me about every other day saying, you ready to come get this boat? You ready to come get this boat? And the answer was no, no, no. Talked to a lot of my friends. I mean, they thought about the same way I did. So that's the boat Ryan Ballard's got. That's the boat that Ryan Ballard's family has. They all agreed that they wouldn't be comfortable with accepting a gift like that either. He said, Mason, either you're gonna come get this boat or you're gonna wake up in the morning and it's gonna be sitting in your driveway. And I got to giggling about that, and I think I told him again, I said, Ryan, I cannot take this boat. Not so much from you, but from you and your family. Ryan Ballard, I believe, said, whether you accept it or not, it's not a matter of you taking it from me, it's a matter of me being obedient and giving it to you.
And the funny thing is, the Lord, I believe, gave me this to say, is that if you can't receive this boat, which is just a boat, if you can't receive this boat, how can you ever expect to receive salvation?
Which is just a cheap shot, and it hurt, and I knew he was doing that on purpose just to rib me, but it still got me. It still got me.
He told me, he said, I can't believe you just told me that.
Finally, I told him, I said, Ryan, here's the deal. God's telling you to give me that boat, and that's your family's boat. And I remember distinctively telling him, Ryan, as soon as God gives you another boat, I'll be happy to take yours. And I got to being happy with myself because I figured that'd be the end of it. And I don't even know if it was 24 hours later. It wasn't long at all. Ryan Ballard called me and said, you're never gonna guess what happened last night.
The very next morning, my mom walked into their church. Now, this is in Longview, Texas. She walked into their church, and their pastor, he walks in the very next morning, guys, and he says, can I get your son's phone number? Said, I've been putting something off for a year. Notice the year. I've been putting something off for a year, and I just procrastinate, and I hadn't done it, and but I need to call your son. And so Mom kind of quizzed him, and when she found out that he was wanting to give me, that his father-in-law had been put in the nursing home about a year ago, and he had thought of me first to give me the boat that was his father-in-law's.
And at that point, I told my wife, I was like, okay, this is getting weird. And my wife just looked at me, she's like, you know you don't have a choice now. I mean, you're in it, you made an agreement, God followed through, Ryan Ballard followed through, now you're gonna have to follow through.
He ultimately ended up saying yes and received it. And I told him, I said, Mason, you gotta know that normally I'm pretty much a selfish person. I hate to even admit that, but I feel like, most of us may be selfish for one thing or another. But I told him, I said, man, I'm excited for you to get this. He agreed. He said, man, that's if you're that excited for me to get this boat, then I guess I should be that excited too.
I had laid the wool cloth down overnight and said, make it be wet, and I'll say yes. And well, I guess God showed up and made that old cloth wet with another boat, and I just had to say yes to it. I wound up with a boat through Ryan Ballard's obedience to God.
I told him, Brother Tommy, I said, you could have given me a pair of tennis shoes, a t-shirt, you could have given me, anything, but you're telling me you're going to give me a boat. And so he said, I know. He said, I've been putting this off for about a year. And what he didn't know is that I had been disobedient for a year. And in that year's time that I had said no, I even put a windshield on it. I put newer seats. I really fixed it up. I mean, it's funny how the Lord just really even made it, better for Mason. And it was really amazing. And one thing that was pretty cool that I had secretly thought of, because my father-in-law has got a stick steer, a Kingfisher. I had secretly been wanting an old stick steer because he asked me if I wanted to drive. Well, I felt like a kid. I was like, man, I've never driven one of these things. Sure, but one of the things that you got to know is the Lord knows our love language. So it's really cool. He knows our love language. So he knew that in my heart that I just thought it'd be cool if I had a stick steer. So I never asked Brother Tommy, what kind of boat is it, or what, any details at all. But there came a time a couple of weeks later when we were going to go pick it up, and so he sent me 3 pictures, and I'll never forget it, because it was this stick steer, this 1971 Skeeter Metro stick steer, and with a 50 horsepower Johnson on it, and I just remember I was at work, and I just remember standing there, staring at this my Jesus boat. It was beautiful. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful. Because I knew where the gift came from.
The boat belonged to my father-in-law. When he ended up in a nursing home, he wanted to go ahead and make sure all of the kids got what he wanted them to have, and he says, Tommy, I want you to have that boat. And I went out there and looked at it, and I thought, the tires have rotted completely off the trailer. It had sat there without being started, without being used for, I know, 2 to 3 years. The seats were bad, and duct tape on parts of it, and there's just no way I'll ever do anything with this boat, but I'll think about it. And we went along there about a year, and of course life gets busy and you forget about it. And one day I was thinking about the boat, and I said, hey, you know what? Mike and Jane, his son Ryan, is real handy. He's always fixing stuff up. I bet Ryan could really do something with this boat. I didn't know anything about him giving his boat away in obedience. And of course, to the world, when Christians are obedient, they think we've lost our mind. So much of the world says, well, to be a Christian, you guys have to check your brain at the door, when it's completely reverse of that. Our brains have been opened up because we understand the gifts of the Spirit, and we understand how God works through our obedience. And so, went into church that Sunday and asked for his number, and lo and behold, he had just been told by the Lord to give his boat away. And so that's what started this whole process. I just believe in blessing people when I have something that I'm not going to do anything with it. Why should I let it sit there and rot any further? And so the Lord laid it on my heart, and when I called Ryan and he was semi-speechless, and he told me what had happened with his uncle's boat, I was just floored because the fact of his obedience and my obedience, he still has a ministry tool in a boat, and he uses it to reach people for the Lord. And so the story of this boat, sometimes I've called it the $1,000 story, because I found out he gave his uncle $1,000 for the boat that he gave away over there, and my daddy-in-law gave $1,000 for this boat, and it's just kept rolling. And I believe God's going to continue to use it over and over again.
And so anyway, time rocked on, and the coolest thing that started happening with this boat was, you know, as I would tell little bits and pieces here and there about this boat, I had guys at work that would tell me, hey man, I've got a gas tank. So I asked him how much he wanted for it. He said, man, let me think about it. And as time rocked on that day, I told him some bits and pieces here and got to share some of the gospel with him, just encouraging him. You know, he's a Christian brother of mine, and just encouraging him. And so anyway, forgot all about the gas tank later on. But the next morning he comes in and he walks by me, and it was really neat because he walks by me and he said, hey man, he said, that gas tank's in the back of your truck. I said, oh man, cool. I said, how much do I owe you for it? And he said, man, he said, I just want to be a part of that. And I said, really? And he said, yeah man, he said, you don't owe me a dime. So I saw something happening that was really cool, that God began to use this as a way to open guys' hearts, because it was something that we could all talk about. It was, you know, talking about boats or trucks or anything like that, and this began to start the conversation. Sometimes it's hard to just begin a conversation at all if you're talking about witnessing to somebody, because sometimes you feel like you've got to just smash and set up way to begin to try to share the gospel. Well, this is one thing the Lord began to show me, that how the kingdom really works. It becomes this relationship to where we begin to say what he says and do what he does, and so anyway, so that was, you know, one of my friends at work that happened with. And then the next thing you know, there was another guy. We got to talking about the boat, and he began to ask me, you know, what was I going to do as far as painting it and things like this. And I hadn't seen him in a while, and one of the things that I didn't know about him was that he had his own paint and body shop now. He told me, he said, well, when you get it painted like you want it, let me know. And he said, I'll do the clear coat for it. He said, if you'll just get the clear coat, I'll use my skill to clear coat it for you. And I was like, man, that is awesome. Okay, I'll do that. And so one thing it was teaching me, even though I had given my friend Mason a hard time about being able to receive things, I didn't realize how much of a problem I had receiving things. So I had to start learning how to say, okay, you know, yes, you know, and begin to receive things. So one by one, I had a friend of mine, Bobby, gave me a trolling motor. We got to talking about it because in his business, you know, he actually wraps these boats, the professionals that fish out of Skeeter boats, he wraps all their boats. And so conversation was really easy to start up about this particular boat. He asked me, he said, does it have a trolling motor? And I said, well, it does, but I don't think it's ran in a while. He said, well, I'll tell you what, don't worry about it. He said, I got two of them you can choose from. He said, both of them are basically just about brand new. And he said, so just let me know when you need that. And so he gave me a trolling motor, which was really awesome, amazing gift. And then another friend of mine, Chris, he asked me, does it have a depth finder? I said, I don't think it's ever had a depth finder on it. He said, I've actually got one. He said, I'll bring it to you. And I had to catch myself, just like Mason, saying, no, man, no, let me pay you for it. But slowly but surely, I began to say, okay, man, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And I began to see these guys wanting to be a part of this kingdom work. It was just one thing after another. It felt like the kingdom began to move and to begin to do this thing in obedience. It just began to grow. And it was really exciting because it was a journey that I was now on with the Lord. I began to realize that it was a way for me to be able to truly have a witness. So wherever you saw me, I began to be the same, and I was no longer a roller coaster ride. This story began to come together. I began to get texts and videos from my friend Mason that had my Uncle Delbert's bass boat of him fishing with other guys, getting a chance to have a ministry of his own.
This is my offering.
The most interesting thing about that boat, and really one of the greatest things about that boat, is I do not have a full-time pulpit. With that boat, I have a mobile pulpit, I guess is the best way to put it. Something about that boat or being out on the water tends to make people open up to you. And so I've had the opportunity with guys who are struggling with drug addiction, guys who are struggling with pornography, guys who are afraid their marriage is going to fall apart, and even one of my favorites that I've taken out quite a few times is the guy whose life is crumbling around him, but He doesn't even know it is. So I've been trying to spread some gospel into these guys out on my little trolling motor pulpit over there. One of the good things about that boat is most of the folks that I take out there, just sharing the story of how that boat came into my life and sharing the story of how someone else's obedience not only blessed me but blessed them is just a great story to tell out on their water too.
So here you have my friend Mason that is a pastor without a church, and you have, Brother Tommy that he is a pastor with a church, but he's finding more and more that God is moving all of us in a different direction. It just seems that God sometimes doesn't necessarily want us behind a pulpit. Sometimes he wants us in the boat, right in the middle of somebody's life.
I don't know that I'll ever pastor a big church because I'm more concerned about people getting into the kingdom than I am getting them into the doors of the building. And one of my favorite mission stops several times a week is a Sefco gas station. And I minister to those people that work there. Actually, one of them has joined the church. And I'm working on another one. So, and that's just the way I feel, that we're to be Jesus wherever we go.
God is pulling us all together. I believe he's knocking down denominational strongholds. I believe he is moving in such a way and so personal that it's becoming evident. I feel that in my life in a real way that the kingdom is at hand. And sometimes we may not feel like it, but God acts on our faith. He doesn't act on our feelings. And sometimes when it feels like you're all alone, just in his timing, he comes through with his amazing love. He comes through with his grace and just his peace. One of my favorite scriptures in John 14:25-27, it just changed me forever. He said, I will send you a comforter, one that will teach you and remind you of the things that I've taught you. He said, peace I give you. I do not give as the world gives. He said, do not let your hearts be troubled and do not be afraid. And so these words that Jesus spoke himself spoke to me. And the amazing thing about this whole process has been just to see how, if we'll say yes, if we'll say yes and be obedient, everything begins to take action. Everything begins to fall in place. And it's almost so, it's just real time. Even as I'm speaking these words and we're putting together this video, I just believe this is for somebody. I just know there's somebody out there that is just like me, and where maybe they've been playing church most of their life and they've been trying to do the right thing and can't, and now they find themselves in a place where maybe God has told them something, maybe God's told you something, and maybe you just haven't quite taken that leap of faith. I can just picture Moses at the Red Sea, and he's supposed to put his hands up, and if he puts his hands up in that awkward, foolish moment, whether he does or not, it depends on whether or not that Red Sea is going to part. I just believe that there's somebody that's watching this video that is wondering, do I do this? Even though it doesn't make sense, it didn't make sense for me to give somebody that boat. It absolutely didn't. And but it was one of those things where I couldn't see the big picture. Sometimes we cannot see the big picture. And maybe it's rightfully so. Maybe we're not supposed to. Maybe we never will. But there comes those times when we get glimpses of glory. The Bible says that for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. But there is hope in the fact that if we believe in our heart and confess with our mouth that he will save us. And it's not anything good that you can do. I'm not telling any of y'all to go and give something major away. I just want us to be able to hear his voice. The Bible says in Revelation that they overcame the enemy by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. So I want to testify to what God is doing, what God has done and what he continues to do and what I believe he will continue to do. I have no idea where this is going to take me, but I know where I'm headed. And I know that out of his goodness, that he is beginning to move in the hearts of his believers. I just want to encourage you to begin to step out in faith and begin to be obedient to what he has said, because obedience is always better than sacrifice. But if we'll just be obedient to him and just begin to listen to what he says and to say what he says and do what he does. And sometimes it's not going to make sense. It's not going to make sense at all sometimes. But if we'll just in faith, if we'll step out and to begin to allow him to move in our hearts and make him Lord of our life, then, man, there's no telling where he'll take this thing.
Well, this is a little bit of a tough subject to talk about. I spent so many hours in that boat in the back seat behind my brother. Each of us bought, he bought that boat and I bought a boat almost the same day, and we showed up at Lake Fork in our boats. And of course his is a little bit bigger than mine, but anyhow, we've got pictures of us in it. But I can remember many times that we went fishing together, mainly on Lake Fork or Lake Quitman, which he lived in Quitman. So we were some of the first ones to ever fish in Lake Fork after it opened up. And I remember fishing with him some, and we'd win. We had the Quitman Bass Club, and we'd win a lot of the tournaments. And seemed like though he always caught the big fish. I would catch the little 1, 2, 3 pounders, and he'd catch the 6, 7, 8, 9 pounders. And he fished a lot. Talking about my brother Delbert, he was 14 years older than I am, and actually he and I both looked a lot alike. And so one day I told him, I said, Delbert, I said, you know, I just joined this association, this called Big Bass of the Month. This was back in, I think, somewhere around the early 70s, mid 1970s. And I said, you fish all the time. And I said, you catch 7, 8, 9 pound bass, you could probably win it. Because every month, it started over each month. Anytime you went to the lake, it was like you win a tournament. Because if you caught a big fish, you could go have it weighed on legal scales at some grocery store. And then you would send it in to Fort Worth to the headquarters. And if you had one of the top 3 bass weighed in that month, then you had to go have a lie detector test and tell what you caught it on, where you caught it, and all that. And if you won first place, you won $1,000. Second place was $500, and third place was $250. So 2 different occasions I can remember us fishing on Lake Quitman, and he chunks this white spotted coach dog hellbender out there and cranks it back, and Mike, I got a good bass. So I'm grabbing for the dip net, and I get it and I dip it up, and I think it weighed either 7 pounds 8 ounces or 8 pounds 7 ounces. Anyhow, it won him $500. I hadn't seen a penny of it yet. And then another time I dipped one up for him, and it won him third place, $250. So anyhow, we had a lot of great times. It's Screaming Eagle, Jose Taylor and Quitman started making those boats back in the early 70s, I guess, and he bought it, and just had some great fishing experiences in it. And I just love the time we spend together. Of course, he passed away. I guess it's been 5 or 6 years now. But anyhow, like I'm sure Ryan has probably already told, my sister-in-law, Ryan's Aunt Mary, called him and said, you know, I'm thinking about selling Delbert's boat. Would you like to buy it? And, so, you know, Ryan wound up buying it, and of course, know the story. Later on, gave it away. But you know, the young man he gave it to is a strong Christian man, and I think Mason preaches some. And I believe the story goes, Ryan told him, said, you may not have a church normally, but now you got your church to preach out of that boat. And from what I understand, he's doing a good job in it. But that boat has a lot of sentimental value to me in it, because so many good times Deborah and I had spent in that boat. We would go across the lake breaking ice when it was so cold, get to the fishing spot and have to wait till the sun thawed out, but we knew where the fish were, Deborah did, and we would load the boat with fish. But that's just some of our experiences that we had in it, and man, I always loved that boat. Man, it would run, and we caught some good fish out of it. Okay, now you can come help me up.